I found these foam boards in the range. If you've ever been in the UK and you know what the range is, I found these in the range for about £2, and I had a little bit of an idea. Now, they're quite nice and sturdy. If you stack them up, they're especially sturdy. I decided I wanted to make myself a little display board. So I'm just mixing some water and some basing glue. It's basically just PVA glue and covering the entire thing. The reason I'm diluting the glue is because I was working outside, it dried far too fast in the sun. But essentially, I'm just gluing these two foam boards together and I'm taking a nice heavy book, maybe two nice heavy books, maybe a 25 kilo stage weight as well, just to be safe, pressing the whole thing down and leaving it for a good long while. And I repeated this step. So we had 3 layers of foam board, and it basically left me with quite a nice, solid, chunky display case. Now, this magnetic sheet I bought for storage. I'm sure you've seen every single YouTuber who has ever done anything to do with miniature painting always says, oh, just buy a really useful box and some magnets, and there you go, easy transport. And they're right. I'm not making fun of them for that. They are absolutely right. But I had one of these left over. I decided I would make the display board magnetized so that when I actually put models on there, it was less easy for them to get knocked off and lost. Now, using my cutting mat and this steel ruler, I'm basically just taking all of the edges off as neatly as possible. Essentially, the foam boards, whilst all A4, weren't entirely square. They didn't match up to each other, and I obviously wanted nice, neat edges. So here I am, just trimming a little bit off every single side, just to make sure that the edges are nice and neat. And this took a couple of passes, even with a brand new craft knife. It took a couple of passes to actually get through the magnetic sheet and all the foam. But once I did this on all 4 sides, it was looking pretty good. Next, because it is foam and we've torn a couple of chunks out the side, I just took this sandpaper and made sure all of the edges were a little bit nicer and a little bit more smooth. And finally, I took some PVC or some electrical tape, and to kind of hide the edges a little bit, decided to just wrap this black tape all the way around the border. At this point, you might be thinking, why not just do what everyone else does and get a small wooden board or build it out with foam and paint it? And yeah, you're right, that probably will look a lot neater and a lot nicer, but hey, A4 fits very nicely on a shelf, and this cost £2. Everything else I already had at home. I had all of this stuff at home, and so it was just a really simple little afternoon project for me. At this point, I found out that diluted PVA was not actually going to work because it did not adhere to the magnetic sheet. I needed to go inside and just get some undiluted basing glue. So I did that. I mixed the whole thing together just on the magnetic sheet and filled it all in. And the reason we've got this baking tray from my oven is so that we can, in a second, just load the thing with sand and not lose too much of our sand afterwards. I actually didn't have enough sand to fully cover it, so it was a case of shaking the sand all around until we had full coverage. And then piling it back on where necessary. Once that's done, gather all of our sand back up, save that for future models because I'm going to need it. And it was a case of leaving the board out in the sun for all the PVA to dry. Next, we got a bit of a time lapse of me actually creating the base. If you've seen my Forest Bases tutorial video, you know how I do my Dark Angels bases already. If not, it is very straightforward. It is Mournfang Brown. This was watered down. My pot was actually kind of close to running out, so I added a few drops of water to thin it, make it easier to spread over the sand, and that just about was enough paint for me to actually cover the board. I am out of Mournfang now, so good excuse to go off to the hobby store later on in the week. The next step is dry brushing some Velour brown, so I got plenty on my brush, wiped a whole bunch of it off on some toilet paper, and then checked it on my dry palette and put it down. Next, it's a case of just dropping some shade paints all over in random positions and kind of just rubbing. This helps sort of sell a more natural look to the ground. The ground isn't always just one flat color, and this kind of helps sell that illusion. Then it was time to dry brush again. I actually got the color wrong, so I went over the entire thing with Rakarth Flesh when I should have done it with Zandri Dust. Looks a bit too stony almost, and not very earthy, so we swapped back to Zandri Dust and cover all of that back up, and it looks a lot more like how I wanted it to look in the first place. And it matches my bases for all my Dark Angels. This is the stage where I took an assortment of different sort of units that I might expect to display on this board, took their bases and just was checking what I could kind of fit where. Obviously we want to decorate this display board with a whole bunch of basing materials, but I don't want to actually block myself from putting down a lot of units that I might want to display. So it was kind of just a Tetris job, and a balancing act, kind of see what could fit where, what sort of looked nice, and what we could kind of get away with. So this was what we ended up with, and I left all of those bases on there as we started getting some materials down. The good thing about doing it this way is that, for instance, the oval bases don't have to be those oval bases. A squad of 540mm bases for Terminators or something along those lines will fit there nicely. Likewise, the 120mm base that I think is from an Impulsor, if I was to remove that, I could probably fit a squad of Blade Guard or something along those lines. I'm not entirely limited by the bases that I chose to use. And here's how it looks without all of the bases in the way. And then here's what it looks like with some finished models on it. Whilst I am probably going to use this a lot for taking photos of my Dark Angels, I also thought that it could be very nice as a display unit, and it fits perfectly on a shelf. Here it is kind of in context with all of the other stuff on our shelves. I think it looks really nice. As you can see, although we blocked the rough positions in with bases, once the actual finished bases of models are on there, it helps sell the entire sort of forest floor vibe that I'm going for. And so you can expect to see this used in a lot more videos and a lot more of my social posts. I think the classic white turntable is not going anywhere, but for some more natural static shots, this is going to be a really nice thing for me to use. If you've built display boards yourself, for competition use or just to have at home, let me know what you did differently, because I do fancy doing this again and I could do with tips for next time. If you feel inspired to make something similar for yourself, let me know. I'd really love to hear your plans. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Have a great week.